Kia ora koutou. Good evening, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. It has been a minute since we've been here doing these lives with you. And while a lot has happened since we last had a live, tonight really is all about housing. And I'm going to bring in my guests really soon, but I just want to kind of chat with you for a few minutes first, because what you might have noticed since the election and almost immediately after was that the media started talking about housing again. And I'm sure the irony of the media finally talking about substantive issues after the election is not lost on you. And now, look, the catalyst for their renewed focus on housing might be the fact that in October this year, Auckland set a new record, that its median price of housing went above $1 million, that our nationwide median house price increased 20% over the previous 12 months. Despite that we are in a global pandemic, despite that we're in a year when jobs and wages have been slashed, house prices keep rising. So we shouldn't really be surprised that we have the lowest home ownership rate since 1951, and our renting group is only growing with rents they can't afford. So we're going to talk a lot about the statistics tonight and where we're at and our policy priorities. If you followed TOP's campaign this year, you will know that our housing crisis is our #1 priority. Now, let's just fast forward this last 30 years of this growing crisis and just quickly touch on the last few weeks. Now, over the last few weeks, we have seen Grant Robertson, our finance minister, and Adrian Orr, the governor of our Reserve Bank, rediscover the art of having a pen pal. And while that's lovely, meanwhile, their letter writing is not solving our housing crisis. And watching this government continue to treat this crisis like a hot potato is unhelpful. Even the public were apparently holding it at some point. It's just getting ridiculous. And then we fast forward to yesterday. Instead of calling out this madness, calling for change to this idea that we continue to try and get rich from buying and selling houses to each other, our Prime Minister finally made it very plain that housing is too big to fail. That the government will not only do nothing to stop house prices from rising, but it is something that will be government policy, that they continue to rise. But they're calling it sustained moderation, so it doesn't sound so bad. And maybe that term might even confuse people as to what it really means. But it's very clear. This government has zero intention of stopping house prices from rising. And we're saying enough is enough. So that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. And I would love to bring in our guests tonight. So Joe, let me know if you can bring in everyone. Okay, awesome. So with us this evening, we have Joel Rowlands down in Queenstown. Hey, Joel.
How are you? How are you going?
Good. Brendon Monk, who is our candidate for Te Autatu.
Hey, how you going, people?
Ben Atkinson down in Christchurch.
Kia ora.
And Matt Pottinger in Nelson.
Hello.
It is so great to be reconnected with these guys again. During our campaign, we had a wonderful evening with this group of people talking about these housing issues, and it's excellent to have you all back with all your different expertise in this area. Now, something that has really dominated the conversation is, of course, house prices and home owners. But I actually want to start this evening and talk about renters, because this is a group that is growing and life is just getting harder for renters each and every year. And we really need to start talking about that. So I'm just going to throw it out to the group to chat about this, but to kind of set a bit of the scene as well. Ben, you work in social housing. This is an area that you know well. Brendon, you are an architect. I know you know this. I'm telling other people in case they don't know. Matt was our tax and UBI spokesperson this year. Joel has extensive knowledge and first-hand experience of what it's like to deal with and live in social housing and all of the processes involved with that. So I am surrounded this evening by a group of people who really know what they're talking about when it comes to these housing issues. So, Brendon, why is it that rent is just getting worse and worse for people?
Well, to put it really bluntly, prices just keep going up and up and up, and people can't afford to buy. And the amount of people in New Zealand, the percentage of people renting is going up year on year. We're just seeing new stats out on that today. We've hit the highest level of the lowest level of ownership since 1930s or something ridiculous.
1951, yeah.
People just can't afford to buy houses anymore. Now, if that is not a bad thing if we had a mature tenancy law and it was okay to rent long term and you had security of tenure like many other countries do, then it's no problem. But we've got a totally screwed up system in New Zealand, and it really puts people who are renting at a massive disadvantage. People renting, get moved on from house to house a lot more often, of course, than people who own their own home.
Totally. And some are moving every single year.
That's right. And another thing is rental properties in New Zealand, on average, are in much worse condition than owner-occupied housing. We don't just have an affordability crisis in New Zealand. We've also got a quality crisis. We have generally pretty substandard housing throughout New Zealand. And even our current building code is not really what it should be. We are really lagging behind a lot of other countries. So, on one hand, we're way too expensive, but we're also not good enough. It's a real double whammy going on here.
Yeah, we are making people sick. And Joel, your story that you shared with us last time, and I didn't tell you that I was going to ask you this, but if you're, I think it's important to share again for some people who maybe missed that, if you want to just really briefly talk about your experience in poor quality accommodation and how hard it is to change that situation for people in your situation.
And I know the people that have that owned the campground, I just wanted to acknowledge that they really did look out for us, and I mean they helped us get heat pumps and stuff like that, and they were, every time something happened, they were always there to help address the issue. But I mean, the problem is you've got all these old caravans and all these old annexes built off everything. They're not being maintained properly, and they're literally just falling to pieces. I mean, I worked out the other day, I paid about $65,000 of rent for a caravan over a 5-year period, which is just ridiculous,
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, like you've got kids, and then you realize, okay, well, this isn't going to work anymore. I'm not just playing drums in town and living in a caravan. I've got a family to look after. So yeah, you really start to open your eyes to what options are available, and you quickly realize when you're going into a renting market, it's really hard to find accommodation if you have a dog or a cat or a pet. There's this stigma around, oh, you shouldn't have that because you don't own a house or whatever. But I just think that that's just, something that needs to be addressed. And
it doesn't make sense that we treat renters as second-class citizens, which is how I feel that all of our policies are designed to have this two-class world where you're either a property owner and you can just have the best life ever and do whatever the heck you want, or you're a renter and you are absolutely tied to whatever rules belong to the house that you happen to be lucky enough to get.
Yeah, if we jump back to Jacinda's message yesterday about sustainable moderation, basically what homeowners have asked the government, hey, can my investment just keep on going up and up and up and up? And the government here has said, yes, of course. And renters have said, oh, can I have affordable accommodation? And the answer is no, because you can't have both. So, you know, when we talk about governing for the entirety of New Zealand, it's quite clear which side she's picked in this particular setup. Now, it doesn't have to be this sort of renters versus home ownership, but that's what we've got. That's what we've got in New Zealand. We've designed everything around this, that if you don't own a home, it doesn't matter, you'll own one day. So just wait your turn.
But what is so bad about that, Matt, is just 5 weeks ago in her speech, you know, accepting that they will be the next government, she will be our next prime minister, made it a point to say in her speech that she will be a leader for all New Zealanders. She wasn't talking to renters and those in the lower income brackets. She was talking to her newfound national voters or people who didn't vote for her. She wasn't talking about everybody at every level of society. Clearly, because as you rightly just said, Matt, she has chosen a side, and that is homeowners.
And then I just wanted to jump in here. I saw something today which absolutely shocked me. I'm not sure if any of you guys can see this, but this is a pizza box, Domino's, and it says, "Can't leave your car, try a new Domino's car park delivery." So, I mean, to illustrate the housing crisis, if there's a pizza place out there that's realised that there's a good market in delivering pizzas to people in cars, it's just disgusting, eh? Like, almost, I couldn't believe that it's on a pizza box, you know, like, far out. Unreal.
I don't know if anyone's ever, last year, I over 2 nights, I drove around a lot of parts of Auckland, took quite a long time, and I was trying to get a good feel for the areas where people were more likely to be living in cars. And I did find quite a lot of people, but what I also found was throughout Auckland anyway, it's actually really hard to find somewhere to park your car to even just sleep in it, because anywhere where there is, you know, public toilets or something like that, everywhere gets closed off at night. The whole system is more and more becoming designed to stop people living on the streets, just keep people moved on, and prevent people parking their car up anywhere where they've got access to any sort of facility. It's really bad.
We have over 22,000 applications on the wait list at the moment. So just talking about the people that are actually homeless or in need of social housing, there's 22,415 applicants. So 50% of those are single people, but the other half is made up of sole parents and couples with multiple children as well. So there's so many people that are being forced into the situation of living in cars, because we know, like what I do for a job, I work with people with mental health and addiction issues, primarily around emergency housing, but also the private market and social housing too. But we know that even with emergency housing, which is sleeping in a motel, as an opportunity, so many people are still having to sleep in cars, because if you've got a pet, you can't really go to the motels. If you've got a terrible criminal history, you can't really go to the motels. If you've lived in the motels before, maybe caused a little bit of social disturbance, you probably can't go back to the motels. So there's a significant portion of our system actually just allowing people to sleep in cars and to live it rough.
That figure you said, Ben, I think it's important to note that has quadrupled in the last 3 years.
And prior to that, it was pretty stable. It pretty much just sat around like, 4.5 to late 5,000s. And actually, since Labour took office, it's just been going up and up and up. We're pretty much going up around 1,000 people a month. 1,000 applicants a month at the moment. And considering that the data that was just the report that was just released 4 days ago, that was actually for the quarter that ended in September. It came out really late. So real time at the moment, we're probably looking at more like 25 to 26,000 people, applicants on the list already.
And I just wanted to speak on that as well. Do you think that that's like, although I do believe that National and Labour are very similar, but do you think it's also a case of like, now that Labour's in, people feel more comfortable to try to access these services? Because under the previous government, they just made it feel just so hard. Is there a little bit of that, or?
It's a possibility. I think one of the main factors that, because for the social housing waitlist, they actually grade people on A to B scale. I never work with any B rated people because all the people I work with are high and complex needs. So they scale them from like A0 up to 20, and that 20 is made up of 5 different categories of 4. So to get a high category, you have to be rated high in each of those 5 categories. One of those is affordability, but I think that's one of the drivers, right? Because as we buy and sell houses off each other, rent is therefore, as people buy an overinflated house, their rent price that they're going to ask is going to be significantly higher. People can't afford to pay that, so they have to rely on social housing. So by allowing housing to continue to go up, we're basically saying we're okay with people relying on social housing. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers there in the increase in the wait list.
More people are getting spat out the bottom, and we are not building social housing to any degree. And what we have been building has been in the wrong places and the wrong sorts of houses. Yeah.
And a big part of your policy, Brendon, is, giving more resourcing and making land available for these social housing providers so that they can have the control of providing housing much more efficiently than the government can. But they need the resources and the support to be able to do that.
Yeah,
right?
well, you could probably look at it as there are 2 extreme models, I suppose you could look at. You could look at what happens in Singapore with a huge amount of state housing. It is all, it's government owned. The land is government owned. The state is building it, and it has been rented out. And usually rents are proportional to incomes and things like that. And the government is by far the biggest player in that market. Then you've got countries like, and another one we often talk about at top is Germany. But there are other European countries very similar, where a lot of the social housing is done by non-government organisations, community groups, etc. Now in New Zealand, it's a bit hard for us to go completely down either one of those routes, I suppose. But we can have a bit of both. Kāinga Ora is set up a lot better now than what the old Housing New Zealand was, in terms of being able to build the sorts of social housing we need and in the places we need. It's only really in infant stages though. But what we really also need to do is get Kāinga Ora, or the government, working with community groups, social housing groups, and actually take the Kāinga Ora land, and Kāinga Ora can also acquire land in places where it's desperately needed, and essentially give that to these community groups, these social housing groups. Now, whether that's on basically 999-year leases for nothing or whatever, but basically it's giving, let them have use of that land for free. Give them all the resources and money they need to actually build the sort of social housing developments that their community needs. Give the power to them, but give them all the resources to make sure they can actually do what's needed to be done. That's a good way forward for New Zealand. And there's different sort of renting models, and including some ownership models in that as well, that can be explored, that can be quite unique to New Zealand. And it's all doable. It's long-term thinking, but there's no reason why it can't start now. I mean, it has to. If we're to...
Funny, Brendon, on that point, is because my employer actually has community housing. So we have just over 60 transitional properties. but also a handful of social housing. And we had an economist come and speak to us today about housing. Super interesting. And one of the things he was saying to us is that the government simply just does not have any faith that CHIPS, community housing providers, have the capacity to deliver that, which is so far from the truth. I mean, we're incredibly good at our job. In many aspects, we're better than Kāinga Ora. And that even with CHIPS approaching government just to be underwritten to provide those housings. So if it starts running at a bad loss, the government will step in and help out. But even just at that small ask, government is currently not really prepared to get engaged.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of these organisations are very good at knowing what is needed in their communities. I think it's true that they don't have the resources at the moment, but that's simply because they've got no money, they've got no help. And they, in some cases, maybe don't know the full extent of what the real issue is that's holding them back. But look, if you empower some of these groups with all the resources they need and the land, and then I mean we would get good results. You know, it's absolute rubbish to say that, you know, that people who have spent, you know, years and sometimes decades trying to help their community around housing don't know what to do or don't know what they need. I mean, it's an absolute fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, we're throwing so much money at Band-Aid solutions still, right? Like in this report just released a few days ago, the last quarter, the government spent just under $930 million on housing support packages and services. So that's accommodation supplement, TAS, IRRS, but also 83 million of that was in emergency housing. So that was to house 9,000 people in motels over that 3-month period. So we're spending near on $340 million a year just on the Band-Aid that is emergency housing. And I know the government wants to move away from it because it's expensive. Imagine happily paying $950 a week to put someone in a motel. It's a lot of money. But the thing is that at the same time, they don't want to outsource anything beyond their own little pocket of Kāinga Ora.
So short-sighted. So we've talked about helping community housing providers have access to resources and land. Another part of the supply story, Brendon, and this is also in your policy, is making sure that councils actually have some more money to put in place the infrastructure that they need for the new developments.
Well, it's a similar sort of thing going on there, in that central government has no faith in local government and ratepayers have no faith in local government. Now, sure, there's probably been a lot of underperformance, that's for sure, but most local government are pretty strapped for cash. Some have hit their ceiling debts, some haven't. If we want to build housing where it's needed, which is in our cities and in our towns, then we actually need to build the infrastructure for it. I mean, that's been holding back things for decades now. You know, we've had a massive underinvestment in infrastructure going back probably about 25 years, and it's just been piling up. You know, the level of what would I call it? You know, degradation of our infrastructure has been getting worse year on year on year all that time. So we've ended up with an overall shortfall of like 75 billion or something over that time. You know, there's lots of things are failing in all around our cities. So we've got to pump a hell of a lot of money into that. We've also got to pump a hell of a lot of money to help protect that infrastructure and our cities from, you know, climate change, things like this. There's a huge lot of money that's needed. Now, we know how we can fund it properly. The way of funding it has to be proportional to the amount of development that's going on in each region. And we know how to do that just through, you know, the GST value on building consents that are going through each year. Then with that amount of money, you know, on average in a city, that would be increasing the infrastructure funding by damn near half. You know, that's the sort of money that's needed. With that, city councils then, when they've got that amount of money, they will be able to do the sort of things needed. Central government will see actually they're not that useless. Ratepayers will see that actually a lot can happen without their rates going through the roof. Then we can actually start building the housing where we need it.
Yeah, it's the type of housing in the right place is super crucial. What I have been finding incredibly frustrating of late is this focus on supply being the be all and end all of our housing woes. The few other people seem to want to just blame the Reserve Bank, and we can chat about that in a bit. But it's either a few people blaming that, or most people still just saying, at the end of the day, we just need to build more. Let's just build more. All our problems are solved. Oh, well, if it was that simple, why wouldn't they have just been doing that all this time?
It's very complex. There's been for sure we haven't been building enough housing. That is true, and we haven't been building it where we need it. But there are other things going on behind the scenes that have caused that and that are really holding that back. You know, whether it's poor infrastructure funding. You know, the RMA has been a big handbrake on urban development. That is for sure. But I suppose where you're heading is that there's issues on the other side of the equation as well.
The demand side of the equation. Why is it that we have a situation where housing is too big to fail, where we have so much debt in housing, where the government have to have active policies to make sure that an investment, because apparently Kiwis have decided that housing is not shelter, it's an investment. Fine, if that's what you're going to commit to. The ramifications of that mindset are huge.
Yeah, and in New Zealand, right, we've made it the best investment. And I say that not from let's not get too specific about it, but the best from a point of view that the risks are way lower than they should be, you know, given almost sort of confirmed by Jacinda yesterday by saying, look, unlike the business that you might have, which might fluctuate in value, or the shares that you buy that might go up and down, we here in New Zealand are saying when it comes to house prices, there's only one way, and that is up. So therefore, the risk is way lower than it should be, and the rewards are way higher for that level of risk. You know, we've seen that with the 20% increase year on year that we've recently had, and part of that as well is it's the best investment because it is the investment which is taxed the least as well. And it's just a very bad combination where when you've got housing as being the best investment in New Zealand and you have Kiwis we've got more of our money tied up in property than any other country. So we've really doubled down on this. And that's why it is such a serious problem in this country.
Houses in New Zealand, I was going to say houses, the average house in New Zealand has been going up in value more per year than the median income. The median house earns more money per year than the average person does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane.
It's insane indeed. And just for context, so in 2014, our median house price was $400,000. Fast forward 6 years, it's now over $700,000. Median income went from $31,000 to $33,000. Oh, cool! You get another $3,000 a year to help you with that extra jump of $300,000 for the median house. That is the world that we're living in. Where, as you say,
for that generation to just like, you know, make it so it's almost like you just have to get into the game if you want to play. So you've got to get a mortgage if you want to succeed in life. And then the other thing is there's all these mental health issues around having these huge mortgages. I mean, people are spending 90%, 85% of their incomes on these mortgages and rents and bills. They're just left with nothing. They've got nothing to live off. And then in turn, they're going and asking for, social help from people like Ben and myself, getting food vouchers, it's just, the whole thing is just a complete shit show. And I'm really sorry for interrupting you, Shai.
No, Dodby, you're right. It is a shit show, Joel. There's not really many other better ways to describe it. And, in those examples, Joel, you're so right, because when people are spending that amount of money on their income each and every week, that is money that they don't have available to go back in and support our businesses that create the jobs and exports that actually do help our economy grow, that actually will in time help productivity issues, which is a whole other topic. I know we weren't going to go there, but I mean, it's all connected, and housing is really at the core of our social and economic ills. It is the issue that we must solve, and it is the issue that is growing this divide, generational divide, class divide, and we're just seeing inequality get worse and worse and worse. And we have seen from overseas what happens when inequality is growing out of control. We look at the UK with Brexit, we look at US and Trump. It's not a crazy then suggestion to say that can happen here in New Zealand as well.
It's targeting the most vulnerable in our communities, because at the end of the day, you're right, where it's harming productivity in business, and it's hurting first home buyers. But at the end of the day, all those harms are really compounded on those who are the most vulnerable and those who are the most desperate. There's been no move to increase benefits. There's been no move to increase accommodation supplement, even though that'll just go to the pocket of landlords anyways. But the people on the benefits and the people that are low earners are the ones who are really hurting from this. They will never, ever, ever get on the ladder, and Labour will never, ever, ever do a damn thing about it. And that's what we really have to realize, is that we in New Zealand are not the progressive country that we like to toot our horn about. We think we're progressive. We think we care about people, but simply caring isn't enough, because we're actually making people sick. We're forcing people into a life of crime. We are making our society worse by accepting that these issues are okay as long as homeowners continue to make bank.
Because there is nothing moderately sustainable about this approach. We've been boiled like a frog for the last 30 years. And I think one of the main reasons that it's just sort of hit the headlines right now is that this slow-moving crisis isn't as slow as it once was. 20% year on year is a huge, can't emphasize that enough, increase. And maybe the silver lining to this is that the problem had to become that acute, that sort of painful in a short period of time for those who don't own property, for us to wake up to it. And maybe something good will come from this. It's a shame that we have to suffer through it. But are our politicians, do they have the political will?
No.
We've yet to see it.
Well, they clearly don't. And they're telling us time after time after time that they don't have the political courage to do anything, that they do want to put their re-election ahead of solving this problem. Political power matters more to this government and the last government, all of these political parties for that matter, because they will just not come out and follow the evidence as to what will work to fix this.
And we don't have to focus simply on bold stuff. If the government isn't in the mood of doing bold things, there are a lot of short-term small tweaks that they could do to actually improve the situation, whether that's strengthening renters' rights. They could say, hey, look, sorry guys, we're doing the sustained moderation thing. House prices are just going to keep getting worse from where they are. But meanwhile, we're going to improve the situation that you're currently in. They could do that. They could make adjustments to the tax system. It doesn't have to be bold, but just signaling to society that there are other things that you could invest in. But we haven't seen any of that.
And what about this, like really off the wall? But people need like a driver's license to drive a car. if should landlords have to have a license to be like good landlords? I mean, is that an option?
Exactly. I mean, if you run a food business, you have to have a license to sell food. You come and get checked up to make sure you're doing it safe and that you're taking care of the community. I don't see any difference with landlords.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, your food has to. Oh, sorry. Carry on, Shai.
No, I was going to say the difference there is simply that they're not there to provide a service of being landlords. They're there to land bank. They happen to fill the house that they're land banking while they wait for that tax-free capital gain.
In New Zealand, yeah.
Service, yeah.
In New Zealand, the tenant exists to provide a service for the landlord. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Ain't that the truth? What a depressing but true statement.
I mean, and another funny thing is, or not funny, but if we were to look at probably the biggest issue on our demand side and the biggest issue on our supply side, they're actually because of things put in place that just need to get removed. They're distortions that shouldn't be there. We, on one hand, we've got this big tax loophole around property that shouldn't be there. We just need to remove that and simplify the system. Quite easy fix, make it simpler. And on the supply side, we've had all of these funny rules and regulations around planning that have made it very difficult to build houses for people where they need them. So on one hand, we're creating this big tax advantage for the existing property owners, and on the other hand, we're allowing them to spread their arms out like this and make sure no one else can build around them. It's kind of ridiculous, those two things. We just need to remove those stupid rules and everything would flow a lot better.
But this is what concerns me about where we're heading with this inequality, because people become more and more entrenched in their own little world. And if the ones who are the haves who are going up and doing great, just living in that little bubble and think that, well, I want to maintain this and I'm going to forget about everyone else because I'm going to lose connection to them. They're not in my community, so I forget that they exist, so I forget that I need to care for them. I forget that my actions affect them. Well, they do. But when we have the most popular leader, and people might get pissed off that I get personal on this, but screw it, it is personal. She is the leader of this country who is the most popular prime minister we have had, and is choosing not to use her political capital to fix what is the most important issue facing our country. It is personal, actually.
It's weak, eh? She's just sly, like Brendon was saying before. Like a kind of a wolf, in sheep's clothing.
It's worse. She's a shepherd in wolf. She is a wolf in shepherd's clothing.
The problem with all of this, though, is it sort of goes back to this is Kiwi culture, and we're slowly all waking up to the fact that there's nothing sustainable about this, and we have two options, right? What our leaders should be doing, at the very least, is informing the public of where we're heading with this, where we were back in 1980, where we are now, and where we will be in another 30 years if we continue this approach. That's what they should be doing at the very least. The question then is just about whether or not we have the time and capacity to inform the public of the nuances of this very complex situation, or whether or not Jacinda needs to show some leadership and implement some fixes without bringing the public with her, so to speak.
She has that mandate, eh? She should just use it. I mean, people have given her this trust to, keep New Zealand moving. Do it.
And this nonsense about saying, well, it's not what New Zealanders want, or New Zealanders have spoken. They don't want these fixes. I mean, that is.
We've lost you.
We lost you, Brendon.
He's right, though, because there was a Colmar Brunton poll on tonight's news that showed that 75% of Kiwis actually want government to intervene with gas prices, and only 21% said no.
Yeah, 75% want something done about house prices. Now, that doesn't mean 75% of people want a capital gains tax. I don't want a capital gains tax.
I don't want a capital gains tax.
But I wasn't asked, I do want houses to be, house prices to be fixed. There is support there.
It's a bit like if
action.
I mean, if you've had, your kids growing up eating nothing but chocolate cake and ice cream, and you say, well, what do you want for dinner from now on? And they say chocolate cake and ice cream, and you say, all right, there you go. I mean, is that showing leadership?
Yeah, that's so good.
You're supposed to know a little bit better, take a stand and say, no, hang on, actually, we need to rein in this housing crisis, rather than, oh, well, okay, the people seem to be content, we'll just carry on. I mean, what a cop-out.
Okay, the homeowners seem to be content that their investment, that is a house, is only going to increase in value year on year. Let's just make sure that continues, which is what she said yesterday.
And this is
for 20%, right? So at $1 million in Auckland, at 20% annually, it would only take 4 years for it to hit $2 million? At what point are people going to become so desperate that, the people take drastic and extreme measures?
Yeah, well, I think in 6 years, if nothing is done, in 6 years, we are headed towards social disaster.
Totally.
And people kind of complicate this too in terms of, well, we can't have house prices going up, but then you can't have house prices going down because, biggest investment and all those people who've just bought a house, negative equity, all this sort of stuff, which is completely ignoring the third option, which is just we're asking for flatlining. That's what we need. We just don't want sustained moderation. Is that too much to ask? We want the sort of flat house prices that Germany has enjoyed since 1980. That's what we want. And then with the fixes being taken place there, we can look forward to our wages increasing at a faster rate than they are now. And then we can get back to the point where houses are affordable. But we're not asking for the world. We just need to flatline house prices.
Yeah.
And the solutions exist. And this is why, and so I saw that there was a comment before. We're not just focusing here on trying to be a hate club against Jacinda, just whoever said that. That's not what this is about. We're pointing out the point that we have a leader who has the power to have the courage and to be bold enough to talk about fixing this, and at least talk about it in a way that it needs to be fixed. Would have been helpful yesterday. That is why we are talking about her specifically. This problem, though, is not hers. It is not this government. It has been getting worse for 30 years. I just want to point that out in case there's been mixed messages here. We're talking about her specifically this evening because of her statements yesterday, for context. Okay, where to from here? I think anyone who's still watching us now, I'm sure you're all as passionate about this being fixed as we are. Why we're all still here. What we need and what TOP is calling for is for Parliament, not just the government, all political parties to say that to declare for all of us, there is a housing emergency, and then to take real action, cross-party cooperation to implement solutions experts are recommending. And cross-party is so important because we need to be seeing our politicians put solutions before re-election. And you'll only get that when Labour and National are forced to work together to deal with this. Because otherwise, housing won't just be a hot potato. It won't just be a political football that gets chucked between them to see who has a greater power to bum the other out. It's pathetic. Because at the end of the day, every time that they just blame each other for this crisis is another day they're not focusing on the solutions that we need. And we all suffer. So we will be preparing a petition and we will be circulating it this week. And to everybody who has been messaging us, messaging me, messaging our candidates, feeling so inspired to take action, please sign the petition. Do more than that if you want. Please, this is the time. Do not stop. The squeaky door gets the oil. We will not stop talking about housing for the next 3 years, for the next 10 years, however long it takes. We will not stop because this must be fixed. We do not want to wait till complete breaking point for the solution to get fixed by societal factors breaking down. We don't want to see that. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add before I sign out?
If there's anyone who's more environmentally minded, I don't know whether they are aware that nothing, goes for the whole world, nothing meaningful is going to happen around climate change and environmental issues until we can sort inequality. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And in New Zealand, our inequality is because of housing. That's where we've got to start with everything. We've got to fix that before we can tackle a lot of other problems. Or we're screwed.
Well
So
said.
let's take action and not be screwed, okay? We can fight this together and we can fix this. So to you four, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'm lucky that I get to share your knowledge and expertise with everyone out there tuning in. To each of you who have tuned in, thank you so much. Thanks for your patience between lives. I know it was a long minute, but we're bringing these back. So we will be back here regularly with you, and we will take you through the action that we're taking every week to keep putting pressure to the extent that we possibly can. We're here with you. Thank you for joining us.